Welcome back to the Mike Bates Show. This is Mike Bates. The Democrats and the media described the January 6th protest and riot as the worst attack on the Capitol since the War of 1812. On August 24th, 1814, during the War of 1812, which despite its name actually lasted from June 1812 to February 1815, British troops set fire to the White House, the Capitol building, and the Library of Congress, which was then housed in the Senate wing of the Capitol building. They torched other public buildings too, but those were the biggies. But have we experienced no other attacks at the Capitol building since 1814 until Trump supporters broke into it on January 6th? The Democrats want you to believe that. But just like almost everything the Democrats want you to believe, it's not true. And it's not like we need to go that far back for incidents that were far more violent and destructive than the events of January 6th. The Democrats don't want you to know about them, and their allies in big media sure aren't going to tell you about them. But I will. I'll do this chronologically, so we'll begin a ways back. But these are all after the War of 1812. On January 30th, 1835, politicians were gathered in the Capitol building for the funeral of South Carolina Congressman Warren Davis. Among those in attendance was the President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. As President Jackson exited the building after the funeral, Richard Lawrence pulled a pistol from his jacket, aimed it at Jackson, and pulled the trigger. And although the percussion cap fired, the bullet failed to discharge. So he drew a second pistol, and that one also misfired. Jackson then proceeded to beat his would-be assassin with a cane. And do you know who finally subdued Lawrence? Tennessee Congressman Davy Crockett. And do you know who prosecuted Lawrence? Yeah, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, of course. But do you know his name? His name was Francis Scott Key, who had written the Star-Spangled Banner 24 years before. Interesting historical trivia, huh? Anyway, that was the first assassination attempt on a U.S. president. It wasn't successful, but I'd classify that attack on the U.S. Capitol as far worse than what happened on January 6, 2021. Wouldn't you? On July 2nd, 1915, a professor at Harvard University named Eric Munter wanted to plant dynamite in the Senate chamber, but it was locked, so he planted it in the Senate's reception room. And that dynamite exploded that night. Now, no one was killed in the explosion, but Eric Munter committed suicide while in jail awaiting trial for both his July 2nd attack on the Capitol and his non-fatal shooting of J.P. Morgan the next day. I'd classify that attack on the U.S. Capitol as far worse than what happened on January 6, 2021. Wouldn't you? On March 1st, 1954, 4 members of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party entered the visitors gallery on the House side and sat down to watch the proceedings. Unbeknownst to the police officers in the Capitol, those 4 were each armed with handguns. Well, a little while later, they unfurled a Puerto Rican flag, shouted "Viva Puerto Rico Libre," meaning "Long live free Puerto Rico," a call for Puerto Rican independence, and fired their pistols at the congressmen below. Now, fortunately, no one was killed in the shooting, but 5 congressmen were wounded, 1 seriously. And in what would later become a tradition by Democrat presidents to grant clemency to terrorists who attacked the U.S. Capitol building and its elected representatives, Jimmy Carter commuted their sentences so all 4 of them got out of prison early. I'd classify that attack on the U.S. Capitol as far worse than what happened on January 6, 2021. Wouldn't you? On March 1st, 1971, members of the Weather Underground, a violent pro-communist domestic terrorist organization founded by members of the Students for a Democratic Society, set off a bomb on the Senate side of the United States Capitol. No one was hurt, but damage to the building was extensive. I'd classify that attack on the U.S. Capitol as far worse than what happened on January 6, 2021. Wouldn't you? And before I move on to the next attack on the U.S. Capitol, I'd like to remind you that Bernadine Dorn and her husband Bill Ayers were the leaders of the communist revolutionary group Weather Underground, and they were both suspected of planting explosives at government buildings. Dorn was convicted of other crimes. Ayers was never convicted of any felonies. But it was at Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn's home in Chicago that Barack Hussein Obama launched his political career in 1995. Yeah, the picture gets quite interesting when those dots get connected, doesn't it? On November 7th, 1983, a group of female Marxist revolutionaries known as the May 19th Communist Organization, M19 for short, were certainly more violent and destructive than the January 6th rioters were. The group's name was based on the birthdays of Ho Chi Minh and Malcolm X, who were both born on May 19th. It consisted of domestic terrorists from the Weather Underground, the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panthers, and Students for a Democratic Society. And if it was around today, it would be supported by the Black Lives Matter terrorists and at least half of the elected Democrats in Congress. Why do I say that? Because if you look at the agendas of M19 and Black Lives Matter, you'll find they have a lot in common. It's almost as if BLM simply copied the manifesto of the May 19th Communist Organization. On November 7th, 1983, they planted a bomb underneath a bench near the chambers of the United States Senate, which detonated that night. Fortunately, the Senate had already adjourned for the day, so no senators were injured, and no one was killed. But I'd classify that attack on the U.S. Capitol as far worse than what happened on January 6, 2021. Wouldn't you? And for what it's worth, and I think it's worth a lot or I wouldn't mention it, two of the terrorists who were responsible for that bombing, Linda Evans and Susan Rosenberg, were released from prison early because President Clinton commuted their sentences on his last day in office. And I should point out that although their bombing of the U.S. Capitol didn't result in any deaths, the group was responsible for deaths in some of their other acts of domestic terrorism. Oh, and what did Susan Rosenberg do after she was released from prison? She taught as a college professor. Because nothing qualifies someone to be a college professor more than their hatred for the United States. And if you've got a few felony convictions for acts of terrorism against the U.S., well, those are considered bonus points on a professor's resume. And what did Linda Evans do with her post-prison life? No, she didn't go on to star in the TV show Dynasty. That was a different Linda Evans. This Linda Evans went on to work with a host of leftist nonprofit organizations that promote lesbianism and so-called social justice for black people. On July 24th, 1998, two Capitol police officers were shot and killed by Russell Weston Jr. when they tried to stop him after he ran through metal detectors at the door. A tourist was also injured in that shooting, but she survived. I'd classify that attack on the U.S. Capitol as far worse than what happened on January 6, 2021. Wouldn't you? What percentage of Americans know about those attacks I just described? 10%? I bet it's not even that high. I'm certain it's in the single digits. And I don't want you to think I knew of all those until I did research for today's program. I knew about a few of them, but others I didn't learn about until earlier this week. But I assure you, they actually happened. Yet the Democrats and the propaganda press continue to promulgate the lie that the January 6th protest and subsequent offshoot riot at the Capitol were the worst attacks on the Capitol since the War of 1812. Their blatant dishonesty is disgraceful and disgusting and deliberate and dangerous. But it's also effective, so that's why they do it. They know that very few people will ever challenge them on their lies. And they know that the tech titans who control big tech will either delete or suppress those of us who do tell the truth. And that's why they get away with it. Now, I understand that so many people are so partisan and willingly ignorant that even when presented with the truth, they'll reject it because it conflicts with their beliefs they've internalized. But if the truth were allowed to get out, there are some people who would verify it. And upon learning that what they were originally told was false, would accept the truth as what it is, true. And that's why I'm sharing it today. But as I've said so many times before, please don't take my word for it. Confirm it. Simple searches of the National Archives or the Library of Congress, or for that matter, even Wikipedia, will confirm that what I've just told you is the absolute truth. From the attacks on the Capitol to the presidential clemencies. And check the veracity of what I said about the unconstitutional election processes, too. All of what I said is true, and provably so. And when you confirm those truths, You'll begin to wonder what else the leftists in the so-called news media and on social media are lying to you about. And if you dig deep enough, you'll discover that the left lies to you about almost everything. So with all that said, that takes us to today's planned rally, which I'll get to when the Mike Bates Show continues.